Good evening. On behalf of SwissNex Boston, the Consulate of Switzerland here, I'd like to warmly welcome you. Thank you very much for coming, but thank you very much for coming to all the panelists and especially our keynote speaker Thomas Mucha. But now John Silva, Inclination Setfish, with Boston International, Pascal Marmier, actually my boss, the director of SwissNex Boston, and Dave McLaughlin with Boston World Partnerships. Thank you very much for coming. But first we want to listen for a couple of minutes to Thomas Mucha and just briefly his background. As a managing editor in charge of correspondence, Thomas Mucha oversees the Global Post correspondence team and contributes to special features and reporting projects. He also writes a weekly column, and I think this fits very well, on world commerce and globalization.
Hello everyone. Thanks for coming, and thanks for that kind introduction. And it's great to be with all you guys here on the panel today. And it's an honor to be here to talk about this idea, this really important, interesting, fast-moving idea of global collaboration and innovation. First, let me offer a quick word or two about what we do, because I'm sure a lot of you, most of you, don't yet know who we are, but you soon will, I hope. The goal of Global Post is simply to reinvent global news in the digital age. I mean, that's what it says right there in our mission section on the website, and we mean it. The global news industry, the whole journalism industry is rapidly changing. You have all sorts of news organizations, from newspapers to magazines to broadcasters, who are cutting back on all of their international news because they can't pay for it. And so Global Post hopes to step into this niche and provide the kind of coverage, the kind of global news coverage that we know that there's a huge demand for. And we're talking about stories from China, from India, from Brazil, from Europe, the Middle East, Africa, the Americas, and pretty much everywhere else out there in the planet. Let's talk about Boston and Cambridge as a global city. And because, you know, the Boston area, we're all interested and we're all doing global things and we're all plugged into this global economy. But Boston usually isn't one of the first cities that pops up when people talk about global cities. It's not New York, it's not London, it's not Hong Kong, it's not Shanghai, it's not Chicago even. So I'm wondering how you all think about the role of Boston in the world and how that affects how each of you think about global collaboration. And why don't we start with you, Dave, since you brought it up?
Again, we're not a substantive organization, so
no substance allowed.
I mean, I think you're right that, you know, when one thinks about global cities, one doesn't immediately think about Boston. But in fact, sort of paradoxically, Boston is a city that really punches above its weight in the global arena. And so much of that has to do with universities and thought leadership and so on. And I was at an event that you invited me to here, Pascal, on Davos, and sort of the collection that you pulled together, I'm sure very easily, to talk about what was going on at Davos. It wasn't a hard thing to do, right? And so again, you know, what we find in these early months is that when we scratch the surface of any topic that's important to sort of this brand narrative that we're trying to deliver, we find, you know, swarming anthills of activity around that topic. And that's true whether we're talking about innovation in a tech context, or whether we're talking about policy leadership, thought leadership in a global context.
You have something to say on this?
Absolutely. So you mentioned New York and you mentioned London, both of which are clearly substantially bigger cities than Boston. And you're right, Boston is not New York and it's not London. But what's interesting about Boston is that it does punch above its weight. And so what happens is that because Boston's smaller, and because it's punching above its weight, the concentration of great people, and the concentration of people who are kind of interested in international affairs and kind of able to collaborate in a global way here is much higher than it is in New York, and it's much higher than it is in London. And I think you see that. And I think, you know, for people living here, the kind of strength of the network that you can develop and the quality of the network that you can develop is not as diluted as it is in a bigger city, which has been extremely valuable to us as an organization. You know, in that I think our members have been able to kind of meet each other and develop stronger relationships than they would have in a city that maybe is a little more diluted.
Just a quick comment, not to say again what's been said, but something that has impressed me over the years, going back to Switzerland often, is just the emotional attachment to Boston. It's just amazing. And I don't know if it has to do with the fact that, you know, what I'm sure some of you experience coming from somewhere else, but it's a welcoming city, especially if you're doing a university program. It's going to be a changing year here, maybe 2 changing years. A lot of the people that come as postdoc and professors are going to have kids. You can be sure that even 20 years later, if someone like Dave sends an email to them saying, hey, I'm doing a BWP event close to you, they're going to come there. So I think it also has to do with this, basically not just I went to the US, but I went to Boston and had this kind of changing experience.
Have you guys found that Boston is transient? I mean, you know, you've got people coming in, you've got people going out, and has that been an issue when you're trying to develop collaborative ideas?
Right. I mean, for Incunation, I mean, the talent flow here is the academic center of the United States and also of the world, especially graduate students come here, start companies, especially people who didn't think they were going to be entrepreneurs. You know, especially MIT, of course, is the elephant in the room, but all over the Boston area, the entrepreneurs, oftentimes people who didn't think they would start new companies, and the reason that I think Boston is such a heavyweight in terms of entrepreneurship is because of I mean, academia fuels innovation, I think. So, yeah.
You know, there's a point that we have on that question that I think might be interesting, which is that traditionally the Globe and the Boston Foundation and folks want to look at the movement of talent in a very conventional, I think, passé way, where they say, gee, I have all these college grads that are leaving the city. And so we've kind of said, well, this is the world today. People move. Human capital is mobile. Let's, instead of thinking about those people in the lost column, let's think of them as folks that can help to carry our message and share information about Boston and help to facilitate very targeted connections going forward, because ultimately it's that Tip O'Neill thing of like it's all local, no matter where you are. So you know, what we're kind of doing, I think, is an experiment in a new definition of human capital, how a metropolitan area looks at its human capital assets.